People say you can tell everything about a marriage by the way a man looks at his wife. But on that night, beneath crystal chandeliers and polite applause, Grace Lane learned the truth in a far harsher way. 300 guests watched her billionaire husband raise a hand and strike her. The sound echoed like a crack in the foundation of her life. Everyone expected her to crumble, to apologize, to shrink. Instead, she laughed. A soft, stunned laugh, as if the cage she'd been living in finally became visible even to her. And then she gave him a gift, one he would regret for the rest of his life. This is not a story about a slap. It's a story about a woman who rose from it one breath, one song, one brave step at a time. Let me take you to the moment her life broke and finally began. The first thing anyone noticed that night wasn't the money in the room. It was the light. Hundreds of tiny crystals dangled from the grand chandeliers of the Harborview Hotel ballroom, scattering soft gold over floor-length gowns and black tuxedos. A string quartet in the corner slid through a polished version of What a Wonderful World, their bows rising and falling like one set of lungs. Waiters moved in practiced lines, balancing trays of champagne flutes that chimed quietly when glasses met. At the far end of the room, beneath a 20-foot banner that read, Whitmore Futures Foundation, stood Daniel Whitmore. He looked exactly like the magazines made him look tall, rested, immaculate in a midnight blue tuxedo that probably cost more than most cars. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed just enough to suggest he never really had to think about it. The microphone fit easily in his hand as if it had been made for his palm alone. Beside him, one step back, stood his wife. Grace's dress was the color of old champagne, simple and elegant, skimming the floor without announcing itself too loudly. Her blonde hair swept into a loose chignon, left a few soft strands by her temples, the kind that made photographers say things like effortless and timeless. From the center of the room, they looked perfect. A billionaire and his beautiful wife raising money for underprivileged kids. America loved a story like that. But if someone had walked a little closer, close enough to stand where the front tables sat, they might have seen more than what the cameras caught. They might have noticed the way Grace's left thumb pressed very gently into the soft flesh of her right palm. Not hard enough to bruise, just enough to feel something solid. They might have noticed that her smile, bright and practiced, faded in the half-second between each burst of applause. That every time Daniel said "my wife," her shoulders tensed a fraction, then smoothed out again like a wrinkle she had learned to iron from the inside. And none of this, Daniel was saying, his voice warm and resonant through the speakers, none of this would exist without the woman standing right here. A polite wave of clapping rose and fell. Heads turned, faces shone, phones angled up to capture the moment. Daniel angled his body toward her, one hand resting lightly at her back, just high enough to look protective on camera. Grace's throat tightened. She could feel the exact point where his fingers touched silk and skin. She gave up her own little music dreams, he went on, chuckling in that self-deprecating way that made people forgive almost anything. So that we could build something bigger together. That's what strong women do. They sacrifice. They stand beside their husbands and say, "How can I help?" The room hummed with approval. Several men at the front tables nodded, satisfied. A woman in a sequined jacket dabbed the corner of one eye. Grace's smile held steady. Her thumb pressed a little harder. Little music dreams. For a moment, the air in her lungs refused to move. The string quartet shifted into another song, something light and forgettable. On the wall opposite the stage, the giant Whitmore Futures Foundation logo glowed from a cool blue LED screen, the modern halo behind Daniel's head. He turned his face toward her, eyes gleaming under the soft lights. To everyone else, it looked like adoration. She knew the exact shade of that look. It meant, "Stay where I put you." "Grace," he said, his voice dipping into a private register that somehow still carried through the speakers. "Say a word, honey." He extended the microphone to her. It only weighed a pound, maybe less, a slim metal cylinder with a tiny red light at the bottom. But when her fingers closed around it, it felt like she'd picked up a brick. For a second, she almost did what she'd done 100 times before. Lean in, thank the donors, tell a soft, agreeable story about a child the foundation had helped. She could feel the familiar script lining up in her mouth, each sentence waiting its turn. Instead, she heard another line, one she hadn't rehearsed, whisper up from somewhere much older. "This is your life too." Her thumb dug into her palm once, like a small urgent knock. Grace inhaled. "Thank you," she said, her voice sliding into the sound system, wrapping itself around the crystal and white tablecloths. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for what you're helping us do." Her tone was steady, measured. If anyone at the back had been checking their phone, they might not have looked up yet. But several people at the front, close enough to see the way her chest rose and fell, felt something in the room tilt the smallest degree. And she added, "Since we're talking about futures." She caught the slightest movement in her peripheral vision. Daniel's hand, still resting at the small of her back, stiffened. His fingers flattened. "I have an announcement." The words were gentle, not dramatic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't clear her throat. But the effect rippled outward, ripples inside ripples. Conversations hushed. A spoon chimed too hard against crystal and then stilled. Somewhere near the middle of the room, a donor's wife lowered her phone and focused the camera. Daniel's smile didn't move. His jaw did. Grace could feel the heat of him beside her, the way a closed door holds the warmth of a fire on the other side. She lifted her eyes toward the far wall, as if confiding in the logo instead of the man beside her. "For 15 years," she said, "I've been proud to stand next to Daniel as he built this foundation. I've watched the children who came from nothing grow into young men and women with choices they never thought they'd have." A murmur of approval. This sounded safe, familiar, but there was something I put down along the way, she continued, something I thought was gone for good. The thumb in her palm pressed hard enough now that she would find a faint, crescent-shaped mark later. "At 39, she said softly, "I didn't think anyone would want to take a chance on a woman starting over. And then someone did." Daniel's hand left her back. "Grace," he said too quietly for most to hear, but amplified straight into her ear. "Not now." Her heart thudded once heavy as a fist against a door. She could hear her own pulse in the microphone, or maybe she only imagined it. 300 people watched, fascinated the way people slow down for an accident without meaning to. She turned her head just enough to see him. His eyes, so practiced at mirroring whatever emotion the crowd needed, were flat and bright, like river stones under shallow water. She moved the microphone away from his mouth. "This is my life too, Daniel," she said. The sentence hung in the air, simple as a glass of water on a white tablecloth. Something inside him snapped in a place no one could see. Later, people would say it happened fast, so fast they barely understood what they'd witnessed. But in Grace's memory, everything slowed. She saw the muscles along his jaw jump. She saw his hand lift, as if to adjust his tie, as if even his body tried to lie about what it was about to do. She saw the flash of a diamond-set cufflink, the pale underside of his palm. Then his hand came down across her face. The sound was louder than it should have been, a flat crack that ricocheted off marble and glass and flesh. The microphones, placed just close enough, caught it and sent it sailing out through the speakers, an ugly punctuation on a polished evening. A woman near the front table gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Somewhere, a chair scraped back. One of the violinists dropped his bow. It clattered against the floor with a lonely tap. Grace's head jerked to the side. Heat bloomed across her cheek in a sudden stinging rush, like stepping too close to an open oven. For an instant, the world narrowed to that one point of contact, that one patch of burning skin. She expected the tears. For 15 years, she'd swallowed them in private, blinked them back at the edges of parties, let them fall silently into her own pillow so they wouldn't disturb his sleep. Her body knew the script well: pain, shame, apology. This time, nothing came. No tears, no apology, no scrambling to cover for him. Instead, as she straightened, as 300 pairs of eyes locked onto the red blossoming on her cheek, something else rose up. It started as a tiny bubble in her chest, tight and absurd, a sound she didn't recognize at first. And then she heard it. She was laughing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It slipped out of her like a secret, finally told, a low, stunned chuckle that trembled once and then steadied. Daniel stared at her, color flooding, then draining from his face. His hand hovered uselessly in the air as if it no longer belonged to him, and he wanted to shake it off. Behind him, the massive Whitmore Futures Foundation sign glowed a calm, indifferent blue. In the crowd, phones rose like a field of metal flowers, screens blooming to life. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else whispered, "Keep recording." Grace took a breath that seemed to go all the way down to the soles of her feet. Her cheek throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She could feel the room holding its breath, waiting for the meltdown, the blame, the stage-managed reconciliation. She met his eyes. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look away. "Thank you," she said. The microphone caught every syllable clear as church bells on a cold morning. "You finally showed them." For a split second, no one moved. The quartet stood frozen bows mid-air. The donors at the front tables looked back and forth between husband and wife as if watching a magic trick gone horribly wrong. Then somewhere at the back, a glass tipped over and shattered. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding the room still. Whispers rushed in to fill the space. Fingers tapped furiously on phone screens. A flash went off, then another, painting the scene in harsh white bursts. Grace lowered the microphone. The red light at its base still glowed. Her hand trembled once, then steadied around the metal. She could taste copper at the back of her tongue, whether from fear or the faint hint of blood where her teeth had caught her lip, she wasn't sure. But underneath it, there was something else, something clean and cold and shockingly bright. She turned away from him. The heel of her shoe clicked against the wooden stage, then again, each sharp step like its own sentence. As she walked past the AV table, she caught a glimpse of a small, neatly wrapped box with a silver ribbon, her anniversary gift to him, sitting unopened beside a tangle of cables. She didn't reach for it. She stepped off the stage and into the aisle, 300 people parting without thinking to let her pass. Some looked at her with pity. Some with admiration. Some with the stunned, guilty fascination of witnesses who know they're seeing something they'll talk about for years. She didn't look at any of them. All she heard was the echo of that strange, steady laugh in her own ears, and the hollow space where fear had lived for so long beginning very quietly to empty. At the doors of the ballroom, she paused just long enough that if Daniel had called her name, she might have heard it. He didn't. Grace pushed the door open and walked out into the hushed hotel corridor, leaving the music, the money, and the man under the chandeliers behind her. Inside, 300 people began to talk at once. Outside, for the first time in 15 years, she was alone with the sound of her own heartbeat, and she wasn't sure yet if that terrified her or set her free. 15 minutes before midnight, the side room behind the ballroom felt colder than it should have. Not drafty, just cold in the way a room feels when someone's nerves are louder than the air itself. Grace stood in front of a tall, gilt-framed mirror, adjusting the silver locket resting just above her collarbone. It was small, oval, a little scratched. The only piece of jewelry she owned that Daniel hadn't picked out for her. He preferred diamonds, clean lines, things that looked expensive even from across a room. A soft chignon pearl-pink lipstick, a dress that whispered when she moved. Everything about her suggested serenity, except the way her fingers kept brushing the locket again and again as if checking whether it was still there. Outside the half-closed door, the controlled chaos of the gala pulsed like a living organism. Staff hurried past with clipboards. Event coordinators whispered urgent numbers into headsets. Someone carried a tray of champagne flutes, the glasses chiming as they bumped lightly against each other. Over it all, the muffled sound of Daniel's voice echoed as he practiced his speech, every syllable polished the way you polish a stone until not one edge remains. Grace closed her eyes and listened. He always ran his lines out loud, even when he knew them by heart. It wasn't rehearsal, it was performance. He liked hearing his authority fill a room before he stepped into it. Tonight was their 15th anniversary. People thought that was sweet. She drew in a slow breath. Her stomach tightened. The locket felt heavier, as if gravity had increased by half. The door eased open, just enough for a head of frizzy brown curls to slip through. "Jesus," Grace Lindsay whispered, stepping inside and quietly pulling the door shut behind her. "You don't look like yourself." Grace let out a breath that sounded too close to a laugh. "Is that your professional opinion as a server at a billionaire fundraiser?" "No," Lindsay said, nudging her shoulder with a tray elbow. "That's my opinion as the woman who's known you since you were 19 and trying to cover your rent by singing at O'Malley's on Friday nights." Grace's smile tilted. A pang, sharp and familiar, moved through her chest at the mention of another life. Smoky bar lights, mismatched chairs, the faint stickiness of the floor, her voice soaked in youth, and maybe a little too much hope. "You should be out there," Lindsay murmured. "Being well, not this?" Grace opened her eyes again, meeting her own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked polished, poised, prepared to be the gentle ornament beside her husband on stage. An image curated over 15 years. A role she learned the way some people learn a second language, through repetition, correction, praise when she got it right. "I'm fine," she said softly. Lindsay arched a brow. "You're not. Your tell is showing." "My tell, yeah. The thumb thing. You press it into your palm when you're about to either cry or do something extremely stupid." Grace looked down. Her thumb was indeed circling the same spot on her palm over and over. She stopped, then started again. Lindsay lowered her voice. "What's going on? And don't say nothing, because your cheekbones tense when you lie." Grace hesitated. She could hear applause from the ballroom, now modest but growing louder. Daniel must have stepped up to thank donors as they took their seats. Her pulse picked up in time with the rhythm. "I got an email," she finally said. Lindsay leaned in. "What kind of email, eh?" "Good one." Grace swallowed. "From the Nashville residency, the one for adult artists." Lindsay's mouth dropped open in a silent gasp. The tray in her hand tipped, then steadied. "The 12-month program. The one you said you'd never get into because you were too old and too rusty and too busy being Boston royalty." Grace nodded. "You got accepted." Lindsay's voice wavered between disbelief and pride. "Grace, that's huge. I know. When do they want you, mid-March?" "That's like 3 months from now." Grace nodded again. The truth had a pulse of its own. She could feel it beating through her ribcage. Lindsay exhaled. "Does he know?" "No." "And you're thinking about telling him tonight," Lindsay hissed, barely louder than breath. "At his fundraiser, in front of everyone." "I wasn't," Grace murmured. "But when he said earlier that he wanted me to come up on stage with him, something in me just shifted." From the ballroom came the crescendo of applause, followed by the smooth, booming warmth of Daniel's practiced voice. Probably a story about a boy from Roxbury who learned to code thanks to the Foundation's scholarship program. The kind of story Grace used to hear first before Daniel learned to save the good ones for his speeches. Lindsay shook her head hard. "If you say anything up there, anything he didn't script, he'll lose it." "You know he will." Grace didn't answer. Because she did know. She'd known in small ways for years. Not from bruises or shouts. Daniel didn't need those. His tools were subtler. A quiet correction, a gentle nudge, a look that carried both disappointment and ownership. Slowly, elegantly, he redirected her life until all the roads led to him. But the email had opened a door she hadn't expected to see again. A door she thought had rusted shut. "You're scaring me," Lindsay said softly. "I'm scaring myself." The locket at her throat felt warm now, as though someone had cupped it in their hand. She remembered her mother giving it to her on her 18th birthday. "Something from you," she'd said, "to remind you who you are when other people forget." Grace touched it once, then looked toward the ballroom doors. The applause swelled again. Daniel must have finished the preamble and was transitioning to the main speech. Soon he would call her name. She could hear his voice already forming the gentle invitation he liked to use. "My wife would like to say a few words." He hadn't asked her if she wanted to. He never did. Her breath tightened. Lindsay stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Grace, you don't have to do anything. You can just smile, stand there, nod. That's what he expects. You can keep the residency to yourself for now. You can tell him later. Privately, safely." Grace let the words settle into the room. Safe, later. Quiet. These were the soft ropes she'd used to tie down her own wants for years. She heard footsteps outside. An event coordinator's voice. "Mr. Whitmore is about to introduce his wife. Someone fetch her, please." Grace's heart thudded. "Don't do this," Lindsay urged. "Not here. He'll humiliate you." Grace looked at her. Friend really looked. Lindsay wasn't afraid for Daniel's reputation. She was afraid for Grace's body, her heart, the tender places no Gala lighting could hide. But when Grace spoke, her voice came from somewhere deeper than fear. "I'm tired, Linz. I know." "No." Grace shook her head slowly. "I'm tired of being a prop." Lindsay's eyes filled. "Then don't go up there." Grace glanced toward the double doors glowing faintly with spillover light from the ballroom. She could picture it, the chandeliers, the donors, Daniel's easy smile, her assigned place at his side. If her life blew up tonight, it wouldn't be the first time a woman rebuilt herself from rubble. She wasn't the first, she wouldn't be the last. She straightened her shoulders. "If my life blows up tonight," she said softly, "then it blows up." The door opened. A staff member peeked in. "Mrs. Whitmore, he's calling you." Grace smoothed the front of her dress with trembling hands. The locket glinted. Her pulse beat steady, faster, steadier. Lindsay whispered, "Grace, please." But Grace was already walking toward the ballroom, toward the bright lights, toward the version of herself she hadn't yet met. She didn't know what would happen when she stepped through those doors, only that she couldn't stay behind them anymore. When Grace stepped onto the stage, the ballroom glowed too brightly, like the light itself was watching. 300 donors leaned comfortably in their chairs, glasses in hand, attention already warmed and softened by Daniel's charm. The string quartet eased their bows to their laps, and the MC smiled with the fond pride of someone who believed he was introducing a perfect couple. Daniel welcomed her with a touch at the small of her back. To everyone else it looked tender. To Grace, it felt like a reminder. His hand lingered there, light but unmistakably firm. "Stay beside me. Stay in line." "And now," Daniel said, drawing the microphone close, "I want to introduce the woman who makes all of this possible." He angled toward her, producing his signature soft laugh, the kind that made audiences feel like they were being let into a private joke. "Grace gave up her little music dreams to support my vision. That's what real partnership looks like." Polite laughter rose around the room, a gentle ripple of approval. "Little music dreams," he repeated. A donor leaned toward her wife and murmured something like, "Isn't that sweet?" A few people clapped again lightly, as if applauding Grace for trimming herself down to fit. Grace felt the words land like pebbles against glass, not enough to shatter, but enough to know something was going to break soon. Daniel turned to her, offering the microphone with the same gracious smile he used in interviews. "Go ahead, honey." The word honey felt dipped in varnish, smooth, coated, impermeable. She took the mic. It was warm from his hand. "Thank you," she began, voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for supporting a foundation that truly does change lives. So far safe, predictable." Grace saw the donors relax, shoulders settling back, sipping champagne again. The quartet shifted their weight, ready for the next segment. Someone near the front lifted their phone to discreetly record. Grace inhaled, her thumb pressed into her palm. "Actually," her voice softened, "that's not the whole story." Silence prickled across the room. Even those half listening looked up. A camera phone rose, then another. Daniel's smile froze in place. Grace continued, her fingers tightening around the microphone. 15 years ago, I stopped singing. Some of you remember back when I used to perform in little bars around Boston. She smiled faintly. Small audiences, sticky floors, off-key pianos. But those nights, they were mine. Murmurs. Someone whispered, "I didn't know she sang." Daniel's arm tensed. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper, only she could hear. "Grace, not tonight. We discussed this." "No, Daniel." She didn't lower the mic. "You dismissed it." A ripple moved across the ballroom, small collective uneased. Grace lifted her chin. "And I'm grateful," she said, her voice gaining quiet strength, "because tonight I get to tell the truth. I applied to a late bloomers artist residency in Nashville. It's a year-long program for adults returning to their craft." People leaned forward. Phones rose higher. And I was accepted. A sharp intake of breath from the room. The first true crack in the evening's polished facade. "I'll be leaving in March." For a moment, everything held still. The donors, the staff, the violinists with bows at rest. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. Grace could hear her own pulse in her ears. She wasn't sure if the mic picked it up. She didn't care. Daniel's face shifted first, confusion, then irritation, then something darker, more familiar, turning the edges of his expression rigid. "You need to stop talking," he hissed. Now, cameras continued to rise. Grace steadied herself. She felt strangely calm. "This is my life too, Daniel." And then, the world cracked. Daniel's hand shot out, not in a gesture to take the microphone, not in anger disguised as restraint. No. His palm came across her face with an open, practiced force that suggested this wasn't the first time he had imagined doing it. The sound was impossibly loud. A single, violent clap that echoed through marble and air and bone. It struck the microphones, amplifying the blow, sending it ringing through the ballroom speakers. Someone screamed. A woman near the front dropped her champagne flute. It shattered across the tile. A man got half out of his chair, then froze, unsure whether to intervene or pretend this wasn't happening. Grace's head snapped to the side. Her cheek flared hot, white hot, then throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She felt the sting travel down her neck, the imprint of him lingering on her skin. She didn't cry. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't swallow anything. Not fear, not apology, not the desperate urge to smooth things over. She straightened slowly. Daniel's hand hovered uselessly in the air, as if he suddenly didn't recognize it. 300 people stared, horrified. Every camera lens pointed at the stage. The string quartet sat frozen bows mid-air, the room suspended between disbelief and the terrible certainty that they had just witnessed something real. Grace touched her cheek, not tenderly, but with a strange, thoughtful mercy, like she was acknowledging a piece of truth finally forced into the light. And something inside her, long buried, long quiet, clicked open. The laugh that rose from her chest surprised even her. Soft at first, then steadier, almost relieved. A laugh that didn't mock, didn't provoke, it simply recognized. "Thank you," she said, voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "You finally showed them." Gasps scattered across the ballroom. Daniel stepped toward her hand, twitching as if to grab her arm. Grace stepped back. Her heels clicked once against the wooden stage. The only sound in the room. She lowered the microphone onto the podium, the soft clink echoing in the thick silence. Then she turned, walking past him, past the carefully posed donors, past the rows of chairs arranged to look effortless. As she passed the AV table, she saw it a small, rectangular box wrapped in silver paper. His anniversary gift from her. Inside was a vintage vinyl pressing of her favorite folk singer, something she once loved before she learned to love quietly. She didn't pause. She didn't touch it. She simply kept walking, leaving the box behind like a leftover piece of someone else's life. The doors of the ballroom were only 20 steps away. She counted each one. Behind her, the room stayed frozen. No music, no applause, no recovery. Just the raw silence left in the wake of truth. And as she pushed open the doors to the hallway's softer, cooler air, the only sound she carried with her was her own steady breath. A breath she hadn't heard clearly in years. Grace woke to the faint hum of a radiator that had given up sometime in the late 1990 seconds. A smell of burnt coffee drifting from the kitchen, and a lumpy pull-out couch groaning beneath her as she shifted. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the ceiling came into focus, off-white hairline cracks forming faint constellations, and she remembered. Lindsay's apartment, 3rd floor, walk up, Brooklyn. A world away from the Whitmore penthouse, where everything was temperature-controlled, polished, and arranged to suggest a life that couldn't possibly fall apart. Grace inhaled, her cheek still ached, a dull throb warmed by morning light leaking past the thin curtains. She lifted a hand, feeling the tender heat beneath her fingertips. She wasn't imagining it. It had happened. Not a nightmare. Not a metaphor. A blow. A room full of witnesses. Her laugh. Then, silence. Her phone buzzed on the hardwood floor beside the couch. She ignored it. The buzzing continued, first one vibration, then another, then a string of them so rapid it sounded almost frantic. She closed her eyes. Across the river, in a penthouse thick with glass and quiet, Daniel Whitmore woke up to a similar sound and a very different world. He was lying in the guest room, the one he used when he worked late and didn't want to disrupt her sleep. A stale metallic taste coated his mouth. He didn't remember walking to the room. Didn't remember the last conversation he'd had after Grace walked out. But the phone buzzing wouldn't stop. At first he thought it was an alarm. Then he blinked at the screen. 68 missed calls. 22 voicemails. More texts than he could scroll without feeling sick. His PR director's name flashed. Call me now. Daniel swung his legs over the bed. The floor felt cold, more cold than usual, as if the whole building had lost heat. He walked into the living room and turned on the TV. The slap was playing on a loop. Cable news anchors paused mid-sentence to let the sound echo again through speakers across America, that sharp, humiliating crack. Slow-motion replays circled his hand, rising the impact across Grace's face, her hair shifting with the force. Commentators used words he had never in his entire curated public life heard associated with him. A troubling display of aggression, abusive dynamic, power imbalance, public unraveling. A split screen flashed hashtags number, Gala slap, number, Grace Whitmore, number, Whitmore Foundation, number, let her speak. Daniel sank onto the couch. This is out of context, he muttered to himself. She blindsided me. She knew what she was doing. She made me look. The thought didn't finish. He stabbed the remote, turning off the TV. His phone buzzed again. A voicemail transcription popped up from his PR director. We need a statement immediately. Damage control. Investors are furious. Call me the second you get this. Daniel raked a hand through his hair. His reflection in the black TV screen looked unfamiliar, drawn, disheveled, almost hollow. He whispered, she'll come home. She always comes home. He grabbed his phone and called her. The call didn't even ring. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. His chest tightened, not with guilt, he wasn't there yet, but with panic. Loss of control. He texted her in quick succession. Grace, pick up. We need to talk. You can't just leave. That clip makes it look worse than it was. Call me now. Please. He waited. No response. Across the city, Grace finally reached for her phone. The screen lit up with an avalanche of notifications. Hundreds of messages. Dozens of missed calls. News alerts. Push notifications from apps she barely used. Her name trending, she tapped a clip someone had sent. Her own face appeared, her cheek reddening, her eyes widening, not in fear but in clarity. The slap echoed. Her laugh followed, soft but unmistakable. People had added captions. She laughed. That woman is done being owned. That laugh had freedom in it. I've never seen someone wake up on camera before. Her laugh sounded like someone realizing the cage was open. That one hit her hardest. Her breath caught. For a moment she felt dizzy. Lindsay padded into the room wearing mismatched socks and holding 2 chipped mugs. Coffee, she announced. And I'm not apologizing for how bad it tastes. Grace smiled weakly and sat up. The pull-out couch groaned again. You look like someone who slept on rocks, Lindsay said, handing her a mug. This couch is older than some presidents, Grace murmured. Lindsay plopped onto the foot of the couch. Your face, okay, Grace touched her cheek again. It's tender. You want ice? No. They sat quietly for a moment, the old radiator clanking as if trying to join the conversation. The phone buzzed again. Daniel, this time. Again, Grace stared at the screen thumb, hovering 1 inch from the same gesture that had silently kept her trapped for years. Lindsay watched her. Don't. Grace exhaled. Her throat felt tight. Another buzz. Then another, this time a voice message. Daniel's tone was frantic, sharp. Grace, answer me. We need to fix this. You can't just walk out. Another buzz followed. Softer. Almost desperate. Please, just call me. Then another. I'm sorry, okay, I lost my temper. You pushed me. Please come home so we can talk like adults. Grace turned the phone face down. Lindsay nodded approvingly. Good. Grace slid it under the pillow as though placing it out of sight could place him out of reach. Her voice came out in a whisper. I'm not going back there. The words felt fragile and enormous at once, like they were made of thin glass with a core of iron. Lindsay didn't cheer. Didn't gasp. She simply covered Grace's hand with hers. Outside the third-floor window, Brooklyn was waking up, the rumble of a bus, someone yelling for a dog to come back, a bakery sign flickering on with a warm hum. Life was continuing, messy and ordinary and real. Grace wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth soak into her palms. She didn't know what came next. Where she would live. What Daniel would do. What the world expected of her now that millions of eyes had turned her into a symbol she hadn't asked to become. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going back. The thought was terrifying and oddly quietly liberating. The shoebox was older than their friendship. It sat in the middle of Lindsay's tiny kitchen table, the cardboard bowed in the middle, the lid fraying at the corners. A faded sticker on the side still read size 7 inches smudged blue ink. "You kept this?" Grace asked. Lindsay shrugged, reaching for her mug of instant coffee. "You told me to toss it when you moved into the penthouse. I pretended I didn't hear you." Grace traced a finger along the edge of the lid. "Why? Because I knew one day you'd need proof you existed before you became Mrs. Whitmore." Grace swallowed. The radiator hissed quietly in the corner. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed and faded. "Go on," Lindsay said softly. "Open it." Grace lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was a stack of photos, actual printed photos, edges curled, colors softened with time. On top was one of her, at 24, hair wild, eyes bright, a cheap microphone in her hand. Behind her, the stage at O'Malley's was little more than a platform, with 2 dented speakers, the bar's neon beer sign flickering half the letters. She remembered the exact night, the air thick with the smell of fries and spilled beer, her palms sweaty, heart pounding as she sang to a room of people who mostly weren't listening. Except one. She flipped to the next photo. Daniel stood near the bar, leaning against a post, watching her with an expression that back then had felt like sunlight. He wore a button-down shirt, rolled at the sleeves, no jacket, no tie. He'd come in halfway through her, ordered a drink, and stayed until the last song. Afterward, he'd waited by the door. "You sound like you've lived twice your age," he'd said, smiling, in that open way that made her feel like she'd been seen for the first time. "I'm Daniel." She'd laughed, breathless. "I gathered." Now sitting at the kitchen table, Grace felt a strange tenderness toward that version of him, the one who hadn't yet learned how much power he could wield just by deciding what he approved of. She set the photos aside. Underneath lay a coaster from O'Malley's, the ink blurred but still legible. She remembered pocketing it on a night when the crowd had actually listened, when a woman in her 50s had cried in the front row and hugged Grace afterward, saying, "You sang something I didn't know I needed." Grace turned the coaster over. On the back, in her own handwriting, she had scribbled a line of lyrics. "I forgot I used to do that," she murmured. "Write on anything." "You wrote on my electric bill once," Lindsay said. "I framed it." Grace laughed, a tiny sound that faded quickly. Below the coaster were folded sheets of yellow legal paper, crammed with lyrics in her looping script. Crossed out lines, arrows leading to new verses, little notes in the margins, bridge too dramatic, fix later. She read a fragment aloud. "I was not made to be background music." Her throat tightened. "You were never background anything," Lindsay said. "You lit up those rooms." Grace's mind drifted back, unspooling little scenes. Daniel sitting at a corner table his second night at O'Malley's, bringing 2 colleagues from his fledgling company. "You have to hear her," he'd told them, pride clear in his voice. "She's incredible." Then months later, him picking her up outside the bar in a clean black sedan, saying, "Do you really want to spend your nights singing for drunk guys who don't remember your name?" Another flash, her in a little green dress, guitar case at her feet, Daniel in a suit, frowning slightly as she adjusted her strap. "I have a dinner with investors tonight," he'd said. "It's important." "So is this gig," she'd replied. "I've been on their calendar for weeks." He'd sighed, brushing a thumb over her cheek. "Baby, you'll have 1,000 gigs. I don't want people seeing you in places like that anymore. You're better than that. We're better than that." He'd framed it as love. Protection. She'd canceled the show. The bar owner had understood. "Big shot boyfriend," he'd teased. "Don't forget us when you're famous." She hadn't gotten famous. She'd just gotten quieter. More scenes flickered through her mind. Her clearing her schedule to fly with Daniel to a conference in San Francisco instead of recording a demo with a friend's producer cousin. "Our team needs us," he'd said. "You can always record later." her declining a last-minute opening slot for a touring songwriter because Daniel's mother was coming to town. It means a lot to her, he'd insisted. We can't disappoint family. Each time she'd chosen him, his approval had been quick and warm. You're my partner. We're building something real. You know how grateful I am. You're willing to put us first. Us. Their favorite word. Except the us always seemed to look a lot more like him than her. The box in front of her held artifacts of a life that had once tilted in the other direction. A scribbled set list, a napkin stained with coffee and ink, a ticket stub from the first open mic she'd ever played, the one she still had the flyer for somewhere. Grace's eyes burned. She reached deeper into the box and pulled out a small notebook, the cardboard cover worn at the edges. On the front, in blue ink, she'd written Grace Songs, like a teenager, labeling her diary. I forgot you had that one, Lindsay said. You used to guard it like it held state secrets. Grace opened it. The last dated entry was from 14 years ago. A half-finished verse about waking up in a house that didn't feel like hers yet, boxes still everywhere, Daniel asleep in the next room. The handwriting stopped mid-line. Why'd you stop? Lindsay asked quietly. It was a little less this month, a cancelled gig here, a skipped writing session there. Every time there was a good reason, a dinner, a trip, someone who needed us at an event. And every time I said yes to him, he said I was such a team player. Felt good to be useful. She thumbed through the remaining blank pages. So many of them. I thought I was being mature, she said. Putting away childish things. Lindsay shook her head. Your music wasn't childish. His ego was. Grace let out a soft, humorless sound that might have been a laugh. The phone under the pillow on the couch buzzed again in the other room, muffled but insistent. Neither of them moved. Grace picked up a pen from the table, its cap chewed from Lindsay's nervous habit. She hesitated, then pressed it to an empty page at the back of the notebook. The first word came out crooked. The next a little steadier. She wrote slowly. I set my own voice on mute so yours could fill the room. The letters wobbled slightly, ink pooling where her hand trembled. She stared at the sentence. It wasn't perfect. It didn't rhyme. It didn't need to. Lindsay leaned over to read. Her eyes softened. That's a start. Grace closed the notebook gently, like something fragile. You know, Lindsay said after a moment, you don't have to go back as his wife. Grace looked up. You could go back as you. Lindsay shrugged. Or not go back at all. You're allowed to walk away from a life that doesn't fit, even if you helped pick it out. The radiator hissed. A truck rumbled by outside. Somewhere down the hall, someone turned up a TV. A news anchor's voice bled faintly through the thin walls, saying words like scandal and footage obtained in allegations. Grace's cheek pulsed in time with her heartbeat. For 15 years, she said slowly, I have been trying to be the right kind of wife for him. Softer, quieter, easier to stand next to. She thought of herself on that stage, the sound of the slap, the feel of her own surprising laugh. I don't want to spend the next 15 trying to forget the girl in these pictures. Lindsay's eyes glistened. So, don't. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper, as if saying it too loud might break something sacred. I think I want out, Linz. She tasted the word before she said it. It felt foreign and inevitable all at once. Out of last night? Lindsay asked. Grace shook her head. Not just last night, she said. From the whole thing. The word divorce didn't leave her lips yet, but it sat there heavy and real, waiting like a suitcase by the door, half-packed, daring her to pick it up. The law office sat on the 4th floor of an old brick building in Lower Manhattan, the kind with a narrow elevator that creaked in protest, and a hallway lined with framed diplomas from decades past. It smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil, an oddly comforting scent like someone had been trying for years to keep the place from slipping into dust. She had expected something sleek and intimidating, mahogany desks and men in sharp suits. Instead, she found a waiting room filled with warm lamplight and worn leather chairs that looked like they remembered stories. A door at the back opened. Grace Whitmore, a steady voice called. Grace turned. Anna Reeves was in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a low twist, and a face lined not from frowning, but from listening. She wore a navy blazer, no jewelry except a simple wedding band, and carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had guided hundreds of women through storms. "Come in," Anna said softly. "Let's talk." Grace followed her into a modest office, 2 chairs, a desk, a ficus plant, leaning toward the light, and neatly stacked folders arranged with military precision. On the desk sat a single manila folder labeled Whitmore Prenup. Anna settled into her chair and motioned for Grace to sit opposite her. "I've looked over everything you sent," Anna said, opening the folder. "Before we begin, I want you to take a breath. This is a safe room." Grace inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Anna slid a few pages forward. "Your prenup is, well, brutal, ironclad. Anything you created before the marriage is technically yours, but anything during even songs, they're tied to him under marital property clauses." Grace's stomach sank. Anna continued, "If we challenge it, we'll be facing a billion-dollar legal team, and they will fight because his reputation is hemorrhaging right now. Men like your husband don't let go easily." Grace nodded weakly, bracing herself for the part she feared most, asking for money. Anna sat back, pen in hand. "So, let's start simply. What are you hoping to walk away with? We can push for a substantial settlement, enough that you'd never need to work another day. You're entitled to financial security after 15. Grace shook her head. Anna paused. "I'm sorry," Grace folded her hands in her lap. "I don't want money." Anna blinked. "Not even alimony?" "No." "What about the house?" "No." Anna tilted her head, studying her. "Then what do you want?" Grace swallowed. She felt her heartbeat rise in her chest like a slow, steady drum. "I want my maiden name back." Anna's brow furrowed. "That's it. And—" Grace took a breath. "Any songs or recordings I made before we married. And the ones I wrote alone, even during the marriage. They're mine." Anna straightened. This time, genuine surprise flickered across her face. "Grace," she said carefully, "you're telling me you don't want half his empire, not even a percentage?" Grace held her gaze. "I don't want his world." She felt her voice steady, becoming something she hadn't heard in a long time. "I just want my voice." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but respectful. The kind of silence where something important had just taken shape. Anna closed the folder slowly. "That is the most unusual request I've had in a while." Then she smiled, small but sincere. "And the clearest." Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time since the gala, she felt her ribs loosen. But the moment didn't last. Anna reached for the remote on her desk and turned on the small TV in the corner. "I'm assuming you've seen this," she asked. The screen lit up with a panel of commentators. At the bottom, breaking statement from Daniel Whitmore. Grace's chest tightened. A reporter read aloud, "Daniel Whitmore is deeply concerned for his wife's emotional well-being. Last night's incident was a private family matter taken out of context. He asks the public to respect her privacy during this difficult time as she seeks the support she needs." Grace's mouth went dry. Anna muted the TV. "He's painting me as unstable," Grace whispered. Anna nodded. "This is a classic pivot. Men with power have been using this playbook for decades. Reframe, minimize, redirect blame." Grace stared at the muted TV. Her own image flashed on screen, her face turned red from the impact. Freeze-framed, analyzed, picked apart. He rewrites everything she said softly, every memory, every decision, even the truth of last night. Anna leaned forward, resting her hands on the folder. "Which is why you need to decide right now what story you want to tell." "Because he's already telling his." Grace felt a strange heat rise in her anger, yes, but also clarity. For years she'd let Daniel shape the narrative of their life. For a moment she imagined him sitting in some sleek office surrounded by advisors, strategizing the best angle to soften the blow of who he really was. She lifted her chin. "We're not going to let him write the ending," she said. Anna smiled slowly, like a commander pleased to see a soldier finally stand tall. Grace continued, voice unwavering, "I'll write my own." A quiet settled over the office. Outside the window, a taxi horn blared faintly. The ficus plant rustled in the draft from the vent. Anna closed the folder, crisp and decisive. "Then, let's begin," she said. Grace nodded. The knot in her chest loosened another inch. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't asking for permission. She was claiming her life back. And the story finally belonged to her. Anna had been asking routine questions, contracts, old offers, anything from before the marriage that might give them leverage when something flickered in the back of Grace's mind. A faint memory, a moment she'd buried so deeply, she almost believed she'd imagined it. There was. Maybe something Grace said slowly. Years ago. Right before the wedding. Anna leaned forward. Something like what a label Grace said. A small one in New York. They'd come to one of my sets. Said they liked my writing. She shook her head. But then I never heard from them again. Lindsay froze halfway through unpacking a grocery bag. Wait, that night at O'Malley's, the guy with the leather jacket and the notebook, Grace nodded. Yeah. Him. He cornered me at the bar and asked for your email, Lindsay said. I gave it to him. You were freaking out about it afterward. I thought maybe I misread it, Grace murmured. Because a month later, nothing. She gave a small broken shrug. And then the wedding came, and I told myself maybe it wasn't meant to be. Anna tapped her pen against her folder. Do you still have access to that email account? Grace hesitated. I don't know if it even exists anymore. I stopped using it when Daniel said it was unprofessional. He set up a new one for me, a joint domain. Lindsay snapped her fingers. Wait, your old laptop. Grace blinked. What laptop? The one you left with me when you moved into the penthouse. You said the charger was fried and Daniel offered to buy you a new one. But I kept it. Just in case. Grace stared at her, stunned. You kept a lot of things just in case. Yeah, Lindsay said, already disappearing into the bedroom. Turns out I was right. A minute later, Lindsay re-emerged, holding a dusty silver laptop like a relic dug up from an archaeological site. I don't even know if it turns on, she said. It did. Barely. The screen lit in a soft blue flicker, humming with the effort. Grace typed the old password, her birthday, and a lyric from a childhood song. The login chime felt like a voice she hadn't heard in years. Anna pulled her chair closer. Let's check the archived mail. Grace opened the old inbox. Thousands of unread messages, promotions, newsletters, old notes from friends. And near the top, saved by pure digital inertia, an email thread from 14 years ago. Subject follow-up, development interest. Grace clicked it. Her breath caught. The first email from the label rep. Grace, great meeting you last night. We'd love to explore a development deal, 3 demos, potential EP, if all goes well. Let's set up a call this week. Excited about your voice. Mark. Grace's hand trembled. I knew it, Lindsay whispered. I freaking knew he was interested. Below it sat another email. The reply, from her account. Polite, grateful, final. Mark, thank you so much for the offer. After thinking it over, I've decided to focus on my upcoming wedding and step back from pursuing music professionally. I wish you all the best. Warmly, Grace Williams, soon to be Whitmore. Grace covered her mouth. I didn't write that, she whispered. Anna leaned closer. Are you certain? Grace scrolled. At the bottom, in small gray text, sent from Whitmore residence. IP. Address 192.168.3.4. Lindsay swore under her breath. That's not your apartment back then. That's his place. Grace felt her heart drop, heavy, sickening, final. He responded for me, she said, her voice cracking. He told them no. Her throat tightened. The room blurred. He made the choice without even telling me, without even asking. This is significant. If we can verify that he accessed your account without consent. Grace's shoulders shook before Anna could finish. It wasn't the slap she was crying for. It wasn't the humiliation on camera, or the lies in his PR statement, or even the 15 years of being subtly trimmed down until she barely recognized herself. It was this. A door she never knew had been slammed shut, a life she'd been robbed of before she even realized it was possible. A version of herself that might have been. He didn't just marry me, she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. He shelved me. The words sounded small in the room, but enormous inside her. Devastating. True. Lindsay reached for her, squeezing her hand hard. Grace, look at me. He didn't stop you because your dream was silly. He stopped you because your dream didn't include him. Grace sobbed, breath hitching. I always thought I just faded. That I let it go. No, Lindsay said. You were taken off the stage. Anna slid a box of tissues across the desk, her voice calm but carrying a steely note beneath it. Grace, she said gently, this isn't just emotional context. This is a pattern. He isolated you, controlled your opportunities, and then rewrote the narrative to make it your choice. This email is evidence. Grace wiped her eyes, though the tears kept coming. Evidence of what I let him turn me into. No, Anna said. Evidence of what he tried to turn you away from. Grace looked down at the laptop screen. At the signature she didn't write, at the future she lost without even knowing she'd almost had it. Anna closed the folder. This case just changed. You're not walking away with nothing. You're walking away with the truth. Grace closed the laptop gently, like burying a loved one. Outside, a winter wind pushed against the windows, rattling them softly, like the world itself was shifting, realigning. A breath Grace didn't realize she'd been holding slipped out of her. She had broken with the past, and now she could choose what came next. Grace wasn't expecting anyone to call that afternoon, especially not from a Vermont area code. She'd been sitting at Lindsay's tiny kitchen table, staring at the key from her old life, the flash drive with her old demos that she found at the bottom of the shoebox earlier. The apartment smelled of burnt toast and winter air sneaking in through the drafty windows. Her phone buzzed. A voice she didn't recognize, soft but steady. Grace. Dear, I hope this isn't a bad time. My name is Margaret Hale. Grace froze, gripping the edge of the table. Margaret, as in yes, the woman said gently. Daniel's former mother-in-law. Grace swallowed. She didn't know what she expected, anger, accusation, maybe even defense of Daniel. But the voice on the other end wasn't sharp or judgmental. It sounded tired, worn, like someone who had carried a long story alone. I saw the video, Margaret continued, and I think I owe you a conversation. Grace glanced toward Lindsay, who mouthed, Who is it? Grace shook her head. I don't understand, Grace said softly. No, Margaret answered. I imagine you don't. That's why I'm asking. Would you meet me? I can drive down. There are things you should know. There was something in her tone, an urgency wrapped in tenderness. Not forceful, not demanding, but necessary. Grace agreed. 2 hours later, she and Lindsay pulled into a weathered diner off an old Vermont highway, a place where the neon sign flickered between Eats and simply TS. Inside, the booth seats were cracked, the tables laminated with old photos of the town, and a waitress with silver bangs moved with the ease of someone who'd been pouring coffee there for 40 years. At a corner booth sat a small, wiry woman in her 70s, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. Her hair was white and braided over one shoulder, and her coat was an old wool hunting jacket that looked like it had seen every winter since the Eisenhower administration. When she looked up, her eyes, sharp blue, too observant for comfort, softened. Grace, she said, standing slowly. You look just like she did. Grace's breath caught. Who? My daughter Margaret said quietly. Daniel's first wife. The waitress placed 2 menus down and wandered away. Grace slid into the booth across from Margaret. Lindsay stayed at a respectful distance at the counter, pretending to read a dessert board. Margaret cupped her mug again. I'm not here to judge you, or him. I'm here because I've already watched one woman fade standing next to that man. I won't watch another. Grace stared at her own hands. He wasn't always like this. They never are, Margaret said. His father, my God, his father could slice a person to ribbons without raising his voice. Daniel grew up thinking love meant molding people, sculpting them, correcting them. She shook her head. He tried to build a wife the way his father built everything, by cutting away whatever didn't match the blueprint. Grace swallowed hard. The words hit too close. Margaret continued, My daughter Ellen. She was bright, stubborn, witty. She played mandolin at every family cookout, even when no one listened. Especially then. A sad smile tugged at her lips. Daniel loved her at first. Then he tried to smooth her edges, told her certain songs were childish, told her to dress a certain way for his events. Grace closed her eyes. That sounds familiar. He didn't shout, Margaret said. No, he suggested, encouraged, persuaded. She looked down. It took years before she realized she'd stopped playing altogether. Grace felt something pull inside her, recognition deeper than memory. What happened? She whispered. They divorced, Margaret said simply, and she moved home. Tried to start over. But she never found her spark again. Not fully. Silence settled like dust. When Margaret finally reached into her coat pocket, Grace expected a folded letter, maybe an old photograph. Instead, she placed a small brass key on the table. It was worn smooth, tied with a thin piece of red yarn. What's this? A bungalow I own, Margaret said. Just outside Nashville. I rent it to musicians, sometimes wanderers who need a soft place to land. Ellen loved that little house. She pushed the key closer with one finger. I know about your residency offer. And I know what it takes to leave a man like Daniel. It's not just a suitcase, it's a place to breathe. Grace's throat tightened. I can't take this. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Grace, this isn't charity, and it isn't pity. It's something I should have done long ago, spoken up when I first saw the shine dim in a young woman's eyes. The diner hummed around them, forks clinking a radio, playing soft country music, snow tapping the windows in gentle bursts. Margaret's voice softened. You think last night broke everything, but it didn't. It revealed what was already broken. Grace looked at the key, small and ordinary, yet somehow weighted with possibility. I don't know what my life will look like there, she whispered. Margaret smiled, a weary, knowing smile shaped by decades of watching life unfold in ways both brutal and beautiful. That's the good part, she said. You get to find out. Grace closed her fingers around the key. Warm, solid, real. A future she could step into. Lindsay returned quietly, dropping into the seat beside her, eyes questioning. Grace didn't say a word. She just opened her palm, revealing the key. And for the first time since the gala, since the slap, since the laugh, she felt something like air filling her lungs again. Possibility. The beginning of a different life. One she'd get to choose. Rain had been falling since sunset, the slow, steady kind that made the city look like someone had washed all the color out of it. Lindsay's apartment windows trembled with every gust of wind. Boxes lay open on the floor, Grace's boxes closed folded neatly, notebooks tucked into corners, her locket placed gently on top of a scarf she hadn't worn in years. She was leaving for Nashville at dawn, a new state, a new life, a name that finally felt like hers again. She should have felt excited or terrified or something in between. Instead, she felt suspended, caught between the woman she used to be and the one she hoped to become. She zipped the last bag, exhaled, and whispered, "It's really happening." Then the buzzer rang. Lindsay jumped. No one buzzes at midnight on a Tuesday unless it's trouble. Grace walked to the small security monitor mounted on the wall and froze. Daniel, standing outside in the rain, hair plastered to his forehead, wearing no coat, no polished veneer, no armor. Just a hoodie and jeans soaked through. He looked older, smaller, like someone who had been emptied out. Lindsay grabbed her phone. "I'm calling the cops." "No," Grace said softly. "Don't. Grace, I need to end this myself. 5 minutes. Just 5. Lindsay stared at her, jaw clenched, but finally nodded. "I'll be right by the window. If he raises a hand, I'm downstairs in 30 seconds. Grace pulled on her boots, her coat, and stepped into the hallway. Every stair creaked under her shoes. Every breath echoed in her ears. She opened the front door and stepped into the rain. Daniel was waiting under a street lamp, water streaking down his face, but not disguising the red around his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He broke first. "Grace," he whispered, voice cracked. I had to see you before you left." She looked at him steadily. "How did you know I was leaving?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Your attorney filed a notice of relocation. And people talk. My world leaks." He swallowed. "But that's not why I'm here." Grace crossed her arms against the cold. Then why? Daniel stared at the wet pavement, then up at her, eyes hollow. I'm sorry. 2 words, too small for what he'd done, too late to mean much. For the gala, he continued, for the slap, for the email, for everything. His voice wavered. I watched the video again today. The laugh, the way you looked at me. I saw myself, Grace. For the first time, I saw myself the way you must have seen me for years. Grace felt the sting of that, not sympathy, but the ache of recognition. He was confessing now only because the world had forced him to look. He wiped rain from his forehead. I should never have touched your email. I thought marriage needed to come first. That music was a distraction, he grimaced. I told myself I was protecting us. But really I was protecting my control. Grace's voice was quiet. I know. He reached into his pocket. Before you go, he said, I want you to have this. He held out a damp envelope, edges curling from the rain. Grace didn't take it. What is it? $10 million, Daniel said. A personal check, not tied to the divorce, not tied to anything. Just what I owe you. His voice cracked again. Take it. Start over. Nashville or anywhere. Just don't hate me, Grace. 10 million. The number thudded in her chest like a shockwave. She was 39, leaving with nothing but 2 suitcases and a handful of songs that had almost been erased from the world. She had no savings, no safety net. Nashville wasn't guaranteed. The residency paid a stipend barely enough to cover groceries. Starting over at her age was terrifying. 10 million could erase every fear. It could make the future soft instead of sharp. It could undo 15 years of financial dependency in a single gesture. Her fingers twitched at her side. Daniel watched her hope flickering like a match in his eyes. It's not forgiveness. I know that. I want you to be okay. I want to give you something back. She breathed slowly, letting the rain cool the heat building inside her chest. And that's when she saw it. Across the street, half hidden under an awning, stood a figure in a dark jacket holding up a phone. Recording. Of course. The world was watching again. Grace's heart settled into something steady, something unbreakable. She took the envelope from Daniel's hand. He exhaled relieved, almost collapsing with the weight of it. Grace, thank you. Thank you. She opened it gently. Inside, the check gleamed white and crisp despite the damp, her name inked in bold letters. $10 million. A new life on a piece of paper. Then, slowly, deliberately, Grace tore it straight down the middle. Daniel's mouth fell open. A sound escaped him like a small animal hit by a car. Grace, what are you? She tore it again, the halves becoming quarters. Then eighths. Rain plastered the pieces against her gloves. Some fluttered to the pavement, sticking to the curb like fallen petals. You don't get to buy your way out of what you did, she said softly. Not with money. Not with guilt. Not with this. Grace, please, I'm not for sale, Daniel. Across the street, the phone kept recording. Grace lifted her chin, met Daniel's eyes. You don't need me to hate you. You need to face yourself. Daniel took a shaky step back, hands trembling at his sides. I don't know how, he whispered. That's your journey, she said. Not mine. Lightning cracked somewhere behind the skyline. Rain thickened. And Daniel, billionaire, powerful, polished, looked suddenly like a scared boy standing in a storm. Grace turned toward the apartment door. The figure across the street lowered their phone and slipped away into the shadows. When Grace stepped back inside, Lindsay was waiting at the top of the stairs. Her eyes went straight to Grace's hands. You tore it up, Lindsay breathed. Grace nodded, and for the first time all night she smiled, not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. But the freedom came with something else too, the faint, unsettling awareness that the world would wake up tomorrow with a new video, and everything was about to change. The Nashville bungalow was smaller than any place Grace had lived since her early 20s. A squat little structure with peeling white paint, a porch swing that complained with every breath of wind, and a view of a cracked residential street, where maple leaves gathered in uneven piles. It smelled faintly of cedar and old summers. The floors creaked in protest with every step. Grace loved it instantly. Not because it was beautiful, but because it asked nothing of her. It didn't demand perfection. It didn't expect silence. It didn't crowd her with luxury she didn't earn. It was simply hers. She set her bags down in the living room and stood there for a long moment, hands on her hips, breathing in this fresh, strange, hopeful air. "Welcome home," she whispered to herself. The Late Bloomers program began the next morning at a local music school housed in a converted warehouse, covered in murals, bright blues, oranges, purples, faces of musicians past and present watching over the building like guardians. Grace hesitated at the entrance, surrounded by people carrying guitar cases, sheet music, folders, and coffee cups. She was almost 40. What was she doing? Then she noticed the others, a woman in her early 50s with silver hair tucked beneath a baseball cap, a balding man in his mid-40s cradling a cello with the tenderness of someone returning to a long-lost friend, a Latina mother in her 30s wiping baby spit up off her shirt before warming up her vocal cords. Dreams didn't have expiration dates here. They just had new beginnings. Eli Turner entered the rehearsal room with a soft swagger guitar slung across his back. He was 45, all denim and calloused hands, his beard more gray than brown. He looked like a man who'd seen both hard roads and good ones, and finally learned which ones were worth walking. "All right, folks," he drawled. "Let's see what kind of magic y'all are bringing into the world today." Grace liked him immediately. Not because he was charming, though he was in that quiet, unbothered way, but because he didn't look at her with pity or confusion, or that wide-eyed "are you the woman from the video" stare she still occasionally caught in grocery stores. He looked at her like a student, a musician, a person. Their first conversation happened during a break. Grace stood near the vending machines, practicing breathing exercises Anna had shown her for anxiety. "You're squeezing your shoulders," Eli said gently, appearing beside her. She startled. I know. Old habit. Shoulders down." He tapped lightly below her ribs. "Breath starts here. Trust it." She tried. Her inhales stuttered. "Hey," he murmured, "one shaky breath still counts." She looked at him, surprised by the kindness. He shrugged. Anybody starting over deserves a soft place to land. Across the next weeks, Grace learned scales she'd forgotten, stage warm-up routines she once knew by heart, and more painfully how to hear her own voice without shrinking from it. She'd sing a line too cautiously, and Eli would pause her. "You're too quiet. I used to be louder," she admitted once. "I can tell." His eyes softened. "Something muted you. Let's get you unmuted." Slowly, painfully, she began writing again. Late at night in the bungalow, she sat on the porch swing with her notebook, Nashville crickets humming like backup singers. At first, the lyrics came out timid, half-formed, but then the memory of the Gala crept in, the cold marble, the sting. His hand, her laugh, shocking, sharp, freeing. Her pen moved faster. She wrote until her fingers cramped. The title came last, The Laugh I Didn't Swallow. One afternoon, she showed the lyrics to Eli. He read them carefully, lips pressed together. "You ready to sing this?" he asked. She shook her head. "Absolutely not." He grinned. "Great. That means you're ready." He told her about a tiny Nashville bar called the Hummingbird, a dim, narrow room with Christmas lights that stayed up year-round, and a stage barely large enough for a stool and mic stand. "It's where people go to tell the truth," Eli said. Grace thought about it for days. Then one night, as thunder rolled low across the Tennessee hills, she decided she would sing. The Hummingbird was packed with maybe 40 people, retirees in denim jackets, young songwriters clutching notebooks, bar regulars drinking from mason jars. The stage lights buzzed faintly. Someone's dog slept under a table. Grace's hands trembled as Eli introduced her. "This next one's a debut," he said. A voice returning home. Grace stepped up to the mic. The room went still. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. Her pulse hammered, her throat tightened. She felt every eye on her. Felt every year she'd spent locked inside the version of herself she'd been told to be. Then she saw her reflection in the gloss of the guitar beside her. Not the woman who had stood beside Daniel Whitmore for 15 years, but the girl from Boston bars. The woman with a song stuck in her chest for too long. The survivor who had laughed at a gala because she'd finally recognized her cage. She inhaled. The breath held. Then she sang, Her voice shook at first, like a newborn deer learning to stand. The first verse wobbled, the second steadied. By the chorus, something cracked open in her grief, relief power spilling into the microphone. She sang the moment her cheek burned. She sang the moment her laugh broke loose. She sang the life she'd lost and the one she was building in its place. When the final note fell, the room didn't move. Silence, deep reverent, held everyone. Then a single clap, then another, then warm applause rose like a soft wave. Not wild, not explosive, honest. In the back of the bar, Grace saw a woman in her 60s wipe her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Grace felt something inside her settle. Not triumph. Something quieter. Belonging. She stepped off the stage, shaking, and Eli met her with a nod, not proud, not surprised. Just knowing. "You got your voice back tonight," he said. Grace breathed in. For the first time in years, the sound of her own voice didn't scare her. It lit the room. 3 months had passed since Grace first stepped onto the stage at the Hummingbird. 3 months since she'd found a rhythm in Nashville, morning songwriting sessions, afternoon classes, evenings on the porch swing, listening to cicadas and letting herself simply be. Her hair grew out past her shoulders. She wore denim again. She could laugh without flinching. Little things, ordinary things, stitched her life back together in ways she hadn't expected. On a warm Thursday morning, she was slicing peaches for oatmeal when her phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay, "Turn on the TV. Now." Grace frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. She grabbed the remote and flipped to the news channel. And there he was. Daniel Whitmore, sitting across from a well-known national interviewer in a quiet studio bathed in soft light. He looked nothing like the man from the Gala, the man who'd slapped her under crystal chandeliers. But it was his eyes that caught her breath. They were unguarded. The interviewer didn't ease him into anything. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, "let's address what everyone remembers. The Gala." The slap heard around the world. Daniel inhaled slowly. "Yes, the viral video," she pressed. Grace walking away. And then, months later, another video of you offering her a $10 million check and her tearing it apart on the sidewalk. Grace's heart tightened. The camera held on Daniel's face, and for once, he didn't blink it away. "I deserved that," he said softly. The interviewer waited. Grace stood frozen in her living room, peaches forgotten on the counter. Daniel continued, "I was abusive, no deflection, no softening, no rehearsed PR tone. I controlled her," he said, voice thin but steady. "For years, I minimized her desires, her talent, her voice. I made sure her dreams never threatened mine." His jaw tightened, and when she finally chose herself, when she finally stood up and said something true, I struck her. Grace's breath hitched. Daniel swallowed hard. "That's on me. No excuse. No explanation. Just the truth." The interviewer leaned in. "Why speak about this now?" "Because silence was convenient," he said. "And convenience is what hurt her in the first place. I lived in a world where consequences could be managed, where image could be polished, where I could erase a story I didn't like." He looked down briefly, then back at the camera. "But this time, I couldn't erase her." Grace felt something shift inside her, a weight she didn't realize she was still carrying. Daniel spoke again, voice cracking at the edges. "I started therapy 3 times a week. I stepped down as CEO. I funded programs for emotional abuse survivors not because it fixes anything, but because money should be used for something better than protecting a man who didn't deserve to be protected." The interviewer's tone softened. "Some say you're doing this to save your reputation. I don't have one left to save," he replied. "And I shouldn't." Grace pressed a hand to her chest. Then Daniel did something she wasn't prepared for. He looked straight into the camera, straight into the living room of a small Nashville bungalow, and said, "Grace, if you're watching this, I don't deserve your forgiveness." Her knees weakened. She sank slowly into a chair. "You don't owe me a single thing," he continued. "Not a call, not a meeting, not a moment. But you deserved a husband who would listen when you sang. You deserved someone who didn't feel threatened by your dreams. You deserved better than the man I was, and I am truly deeply sorry." Silence filled the studio. Silence filled Grace's living room. Daniel exhaled shakily. "All I can do now is learn how not to repeat the man my father taught me to be." The interviewer asked another question, but Grace didn't hear it. She hit the power button on the remote, and the room fell quiet except for the cicadas humming outside. Her hands trembled in her lap. She wasn't crying because she missed the life they shared. She wasn't even crying because of the confession itself. She was crying because, for the first time in 15 years, the boy Daniel used to be, and the man he was trying to become, finally met in the same place. And for the first time, he didn't hide. Grace wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Outside, the wind rustled through the magnolia trees. Something about the sound made her chest loosen, like a knot she hadn't realized was still tied had finally come undone. She wasn't going back, but now at least she wasn't carrying the story alone. She took a slow breath. The peaches were still on the counter, growing soft under the sunlight. She stood, picked up the knife, and kept slicing. Her life was still moving forward, and the world at last was letting her. The venue wasn't large, maybe 200 seats, wooden walls stained dark from decades of guitar smoke and spilled beer, but it was one of those Nashville rooms people spoke about in hushed, reverent tones. The kind of room where legends had once stood before anyone knew their names. Tonight, a poster taped to the front door read, "Grace Lane, live the laugh song Cycle Lane," her real name. Grace stood backstage, clutching her guitar, listening to the low hum of a crowd settling in. She was 40 now, 40 with new lines around her eyes, stronger calluses on her fingers, and a voice shaped not by youth but by every bruise, breath, and beginning she'd carried. She wasn't nervous. She was present. Eli peeked in from the side curtain. "Full house," he whispered. "You ready?" she exhaled. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good," he said with a grin. "Because they are." He squeezed her shoulder once, then slipped away. The stage manager nodded to her. Grace stepped out into the soft glow of amber lights. Applause rose, warm, genuine, like being welcomed home. She smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. "Good evening," she said, adjusting the mic. "It took me a while to get here. Thank you for waiting." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. She opened with a song from her 20s, a simple melody she'd once sung at a Boston dive bar long before Daniel, long before Nashville, long before she'd learned how easily dreams could be dismissed by someone who never bothered to dream themselves. Her fingers moved with certainty. The audience leaned in. Then came a quieter piece, a song she wrote during the years she'd begun disappearing. The lyrics were thin but aching, ghost-like, fragile. A portrait of a woman dimming one compromise at a time. "We lifted too high, then I folded too small. Lost my own shadow, standing under your wall." A woman in her 50s, sitting near the front, pressed a tissue to her eyes. Her left hand kept drifting unconsciously toward a bare ring finger. Grace continued weaving the night like a tapestry, threads of old hope, threads of lost time, threads of rediscovered strength. Then came the newer songs, the ones born from the Gala. She could feel the shift in the room as she sang about the marble floors, the chandeliers, the silence after the slap. People weren't just listening, they were remembering their own moments of being broken open. A man in the back straightened jaw, tight regret flickering across his face, as if Grace's lyrics were a mirror he didn't expect. A teenager perched at the edge of her seat mouthed words she didn't know yet but wanted to. And Grace, standing with her guitar and her breath and her truth, felt the air thicken, become something sacred. Then she saw him. Near the wall, half hidden behind a beam, sat Daniel. Alone. No entourage, no polished armor. Just a man sitting among strangers, hands folded, shoulders rounded. He didn't try to get her attention. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He listened. And Grace surprisingly did not break. She didn't flinch. She didn't falter. She simply kept singing. Eli nodded at her once from side-stage pride in his eyes. As the applause faded from the second-to-last song, Grace stepped toward the microphone. The room quieted instantly. "This next one," she said softly, "is for anyone who's ever been told they're too much, too loud, too late." She let the words settle in the air like dust in sunlight. "You're not," Someone exhaled loudly. Someone else whispered, "Amen." Grace lifted her guitar. The first chord rang warm round, almost trembling with its own heartbeat. This was the song she'd fought hardest to write, "The Gift I Kept for Me." A song about every piece of herself she'd refused to lose again, her voice, her stubbornness, her joy, her name, her laugh. A song about reclaiming the things no one could take, not even someone she once loved desperately. Her voice rose steady and clear, carrying stories older than her marriage and wiser than her fear. I kept one light burning in a room you never found. I kept one truth turning even when you turned me down. I kept one laugh quiet till the night it broke free. And now I'm standing in it, the gift I kept for me. By the second chorus, the entire room was still. No clinking glasses, no shifting chairs, no murmurs. Just silence, thick, reverent, holy. Grace closed her eyes and let the final note bloom from her chest. It lingered, floating above the audience like something alive, something untouchable. When she opened her eyes, she saw it. A woman in her 60s, hand pressed over her heart, a young girl clutching her friend's arm, crying openly, a middle-aged man wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Eli leaning against the wall, glowing with quiet pride. Daniel head bowed, hands trembling. The room erupted into applause. Not loud, no standing ovation yet, just warm, sustained, grateful. People weren't cheering for a performer. They were thanking someone for telling the truth. Grace smiled, small, soft, sure. Her chest felt open in a way that frightened her and freed her at once. And just as the applause reached its peak, she caught Daniel lifting his head. Their eyes met, not with longing, not with regret, but with something like recognition. Two people who had broken each other, now witnessing each other from worlds apart. She looked away first. The applause grew, rolling like gentle thunder through the room. She stepped back from the mic, heartbeat steady. The night wasn't over, but something inside her was, and something else, something unnamed, was just beginning. Grace found the envelope just after sunrise, slipped beneath her front door like a whisper. The bungalow was filled with soft morning light, the kind that made even the dust motes look peaceful. She bent down, picked up the envelope, and sat on the edge of the old floral couch. Her name was written in Daniel's handwriting. She hesitated before opening it. "Grace, I'm in town today. No expectations, no requests. If you're willing to talk, I'll be at the coffee shop on the corner at noon. If not, I'll fly home tonight and leave you in peace. D." She folded the paper slowly, palms warm around its edges. Her stomach twisted, not in fear, not in longing, but in uncertainty. She had laid everything bare on that stage last night. She had sung her truth. She had moved on. So why did this note feel like a loose thread she still needed to tie off? Eli arrived a little before 10, as he often did, bringing biscuits from a local bakery because creatives forget to eat when they feel too much. He saw the envelope on the table and raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "I don't know," she admitted. "He wants to talk." Eli didn't sigh or lecture or warn. He just nodded thoughtfully. "Do you want to?" Grace pressed her thumb to the envelope's crease. "I don't know that either." Eli walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet Tennessee street. "You know," he said softly, "closure isn't for him, it's for you. He made choices that caged you. But you're the one who decides when you stop carrying the weight of them." Grace looked up, meeting his eyes. They were steady, unpushy, simply present. "You don't owe him reconciliation," Eli said, "but you might owe yourself a clean ending." The clock ticked quietly in the background. Grace exhaled. At 1145, she grabbed her coat. The coffee shop was small, tucked between a guitar repair store and a florist. Its windows fogged lightly from the warmth inside. She paused at the door, steadying herself before walking in. Daniel sat alone at a corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee. No suit, no expensive watch, just jeans, a plain jacket, and a man who looked like life had carved him open and refilled him with humility. He stood when he saw her, not too fast, not reaching for her, just enough to show respect. "Grace," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." She nodded, sitting across from him. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was aged, softened, like something once sharp had been sanded down by time. Daniel didn't ramble, didn't fall into excuses. He simply reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "But this is something I should have done years ago. Something I want to leave behind for you, whether you ever speak to me again or not." Grace opened the folder. Legal documents. A charter. A mission statement. A financial disclosure. Her eyes moved slowly across the title. The Grace Lane Fellowship for Women Returning to the Arts. After 35 funded with an initial endowment of $12 million. Underneath were the listed board members: Anna Reeves, Lindsay Hale, Margaret Hale, 3 women from local music and arts programs. Daniel's name was not there. He sat back, hands folded. "This isn't me trying to absolve myself," he said softly. "This is me stepping out of the way, giving women who've lost time, who've been dimmed, quieted, redirected, a chance to reclaim the years they thought were gone." Grace felt a sting in her chest. Not pain, something gentler. He continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Your laugh at that gala, God, Grace, it broke something in me. In a good way. I finally saw what I'd done, who I'd become." He swallowed. "I can't undo the choices I made, but I can make different ones now, and I can honor what you lost. And what you found." Grace closed the folder slowly. Her fingertips lingered on her own name, Grace Lane, printed in bold letters at the top. She looked up. Daniel's eyes were steady, earnest, unguarded. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "Not friendship, not forgiveness. I just want this to exist. And I want it tied to you, not to me." Grace inhaled deeply. For a moment she saw them, as they'd once been 2 young people trying to be perfect for each other, failing in ways neither understood at the time. Then she saw them as they were, now 2 adults carrying different stories, different futures. "I forgive you, Daniel," she said. His breath caught. "Grace," she shook her head gently. "Not because you earned it, but because I'm tired of carrying you inside my chest. I want that space back." Daniel's face softened, relief, grief, gratitude, all mixing into something human. "Thank you," he whispered. Grace stood. "Thank you for the fellowship," she said, "and for making sure other women won't lose their voices the way I almost lost mine." She picked up the folder, held it to her chest, and offered him one last small, sincere nod. Then she turned, pushed open the door, and stepped into the bright Tennessee sunlight. It felt like walking out of a shadow she'd forgotten she was standing in. The sun was warm. The day was wide open. And Grace finally felt entirely her own. 1 year later, the small community theater on the east side of Nashville glowed with warm yellow bulbs, each one buzzing faintly like a tiny heartbeat. Grace stood backstage, listening to the soft murmur of the crowd. It wasn't a glamorous venue, no velvet curtains, no embossed programs, just creaky seats, mismatched stage lights, and a hand-painted sign that read, "The Grace Lane Fellowship. First-year showcase." The air smelled of sawdust, old fabric, and peppermint tea. It felt like home. The women gathered backstage were buzzing, too nervous, excited, alive. Nurses, retired teachers, former accountants, single mothers, widows, grandmothers who hadn't picked up a paintbrush or a guitar in decades. All of them had found their way here through the fellowship Grace never imagined would exist in her name. Now she was 41. She had lines around her eyes that came from something better than worry laughter. Real laughter. The kind she once swallowed. The kind she once didn't recognize as her own. Eli adjusted a mic stand on stage, testing the cable with an easy flick of his wrist. They'd spent the early morning loading equipment, tuning instruments, warming up voices. They moved together like people who trusted the same rhythm. Their relationship wasn't a firestorm, it was a steady flame. No rush. No pressure. Grace finally understood the beauty of a life that didn't demand shrinking. 5 minutes until doors open, Eli called, leaning backstage with a grin. "Everyone breathe. Preferably in and out." Laughter rippled through the group. Grace felt her heart expand. The show began with Mary Ann, a grandmother of 6, reading poetry she'd written after her husband passed. Her voice trembled through the first stanza, then grew stronger as she spoke about rediscovering herself at 68. Next came Tessa, a former accountant who had always dreamed of playing the cello. She played slowly, still learning bow, slightly shaky, but every note was sincere, brave, and beautiful. People applauded with their whole bodies. Then a blues number from Denise, a night shift nurse who sang like she carried centuries of stories. Her voice filled the room with a raw, lived-in sorrow that somehow lifted everyone higher. Grace watched each performance from the wings, feeling something hum inside her, something like gratitude stitched with quiet awe. These women weren't just performing, they were returning to themselves. When intermission came, Grace and Eli stepped into the lobby to meet guests. Folks hugged her, thanked her, cried a little. A woman in her 50s pressed Grace's hands and whispered, "I left a man who dimmed me. Your story helped me walk out the door." Grace didn't know what to say, so she hugged her. Sometimes, that was the only language strong enough. Across town in a quiet community college classroom, Daniel Whitmore erased formulas from a whiteboard. His last student had gone home hours earlier. The room was still dust floating in the sunbeams, cutting across the desks. He wiped his hands on his jeans, sat on the edge of the desk, and opened his laptop. He watched a short clip from Grace's spring concert, a moment where she smiled at the audience. A soft, genuine smile he realized he had almost never seen when they were married. He didn't cry, but his eyes softened warm with something like pride, something like grief, something like letting go. Then he closed the laptop and turned off the lights. Back in the theater, the final act of the night was about to begin. Grace walked to the center of the stage. The applause settled into expectant quiet. The women behind her, her fellows, her circle, stood in a loose semicircle, their faces glowing with the warmth of having been witnessed. She looked out over the small crowd. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, voice steady, carrying through the room. "A year ago, I was in a ballroom in Boston. Many of you saw what happened there. A hush fell. Not heavy, just attentive. My husband slapped me," she said plainly. "In front of 300 people. The world saw it on camera." She paused, not for drama, but for air. "But what most people didn't understand," she continued, "was that my life didn't end in that ballroom. That moment was not the worst night of my life. It was simply the loudest moment of a truth I'd been living quietly for years." She let that linger. "A slap is a terrible thing," she said gently, "but sometimes the worst wound isn't the blow, it's the silence we live in before it." People nodded. A few wiped tears. That night, that sound was a door closing. Her gaze swept across the faces before her. And doors closing can be terrifying. But they can also mean another door is opening someplace else. Behind her, the women stood taller. "If you take anything with you from tonight," Grace said, "let it be this. You are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are not the years you lost, or the dreams you set aside, or the voice you muted so someone else could feel tall." She placed a hand over her heart. "You are the song that survived it." Soft gasps. A low murmur of agreement. Someone choked back a sob. Grace turned, gesturing to the women behind her. "And these incredible women, their proof, we're never too late to come home to ourselves." The audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't explosive. It was warm, steady, embracing like rain that nourishes instead of floods. Later backstage, Grace laughed at something, Eli said, an easy, unguarded sound. The women laughed with her, the room filling with bright, ordinary joy. There was nothing sharp about her laugh anymore. No shock, no rebellion, no breaking point, just light. A sound she got to keep. And as the night wrapped around them like a soft shawl, that laugh once born from a moment of pain now echoed as a promise of the life she'd built from its ruins. A life she finally recognized as her own. Sometimes healing begins where we least expect it. Not in the quiet moments, but in the ones that crack something open inside us. Grace's story reminds us that a single painful moment can become the doorway we never dared to walk through. Healing doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it looks like leaving a table we've sat at too long, or reclaiming a name we thought we'd lost. But here's the quiet truth beneath everything. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that once made someone else comfortable. You are allowed to begin again at 40, 50, or 70. Dreams don't have expiration dates, people just forget to check the calendar. And if life ever hands you a moment that shatters your certainty, remember, not all breaks are endings. Some are openings, thin cracks, where the light finally finds its way back in. May you follow whatever light reaches you. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for walking through this story with an open heart. On this channel, we believe that every story, yours, mine, ours, carries a quiet kind of power, and when you choose to be here, you help keep that light alive. Every like, every share, every subscribe is more than a button click. It's a way of saying yes to kindness, to empathy, to the kind of stories that remind us we're never too old or too broken or too late to begin again. If this story touched something in you, even a small corner of your heart, please help it travel a little farther. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul. We'll see you in the next one.